While gut health has transitioned from just another trending topic to an important aspect of health that impacts everything from energy levels to immunity, it also brought with it tons of new market growth and product development within the food, beverage, and supplement CPG categories. Because of this, there's little doubt in my mind that consumers are certainly more aware and educated about gut health, but even someone that's been increasingly fascinated for most of his career with unlocking the valuable intersection of gut microbiome, technology, and consumer packaged goods, I still get frequently tripped up with the ever evolving advancements, new marketplace linkages, and gaps in knowledge that those create about the consumer health space. So I decided again to ask my good friend Noah Voreades, who's a scientific researcher and founder of the boutique consulting firm GenBiome that focuses on the intersecting areas of personalized nutrition, gut microbiome, genetic testing, CPG, and digital health. He's undoubtedly the perfect person to add an exceptional amount of depth to an insightful conversation covering many important trends and disruptive forces that will most certainly impact the future of the microbiome space. Along with catching you up on the evolution of the gut health CPG category, we go a step further and talk about some exciting edges of product innovation and explain who might hold the keys to the next wave of microbiome ingredient innovation. We also explain why governmental programs like SNAP and the emergence of food as medicine is pushing large retailers to start fully embracing a health and wellness positioning. Additionally, how personalization layers like registered dietitians, wearable data, and artificial intelligence will play a growing role in the category's future. Plus, we dive into the possible categorical impacts from GLP-1. Finally, we tackle an often overlooked part of gut health, the small intestine, which reminds me that I want to quickly show some love to Nimble Science for supporting this piece of content. Due to the complexity, cost, and invasiveness of endoscopy, our understanding of the small intestinal microbiome significantly lags behind our understanding of the colon. Yet, gaining access to multi-omic data from the small intestine could very likely be the key to unlocking a new wave of gut microbiome product innovation. So, to reach the unreachable, Nimble Science developed its Simba system that utilizes a single use ingestible passive capsule that allows for the non invasive endoscopic quality sampling of small intestinal contents. You'll hear more about the Simba capsule in our conversation, but I'm also going to leave the Nimble Science website link in this content's description. But without further delay, here is the recent conversation I had with my good buddy, Noah Voreades. I think there's a rare group that can not only play the supporting actor role, but also transition into being the leading man. And maybe for those that have no idea what the heck I'm talking about, Noah actually joined me on a smaller guest segment last year. I don't know when last year, but it was a piece revolved around probiotics and kind of the CFU commoditization, a bunch of different things going on there. But overall, I mean, just want to thank you, Noah, welcome you back to the show, and just glad that you're going to be the one that we explore this interesting topic with.
Thanks so much, Josh, for having me back. Loved the first kind of session we had together, and looking forward to, I think, having some microbiome components with what we're going to chat about, but also kind of thinking a little bit more broadly and unpacking some big picture trends that really relate to a lot of the work that you're doing as well within the broader CPG kind of functional health spaces. So yeah, excited to chat.
Yeah, so just to kind of further set the tone, I guess, for the content, just for the audience, because maybe it's going to be a little bit longer piece of content than normal. We're going to run through, I think, a selection of maybe important trends or disruptive forces that are, at least in our mind, most certainly going to impact the future of, like Noah said, microbiome, but it's also just a kind of number of different things that people can, take the information, probably apply it in their own category, even if maybe they aren't necessarily really deep into that space. Maybe they're adjacent to it or whatever. But first, maybe we need to kind of quickly, set the stage of explaining, where we were before, maybe just broadly, and then, where we are now within kind of the category. Maybe you can add some context, at least from my understanding, is that definitely then, and this is probably when I became, from a consumer and transitioning into the workforce a little bit. It was this whole space as a whole microbiome. If we look at that as like a category or as a space, like it was really the supplements were the form factor.
Yep.
You most likely got those products, or at least the most advanced products, in specialty retail. And then they were really kind of focused on, singular ingredient, or probably through the lens of probiotics. I would imagine that was kind of where all that was at. And then kind of where we are now, and that's, to date myself, that's probably 15 or so years later. Tons of diverse formats in terms of the category overall, food, beverage, different, just different kind of delivery forms. You have pretty much all retail that is at one point or another covering or carrying a number of different advanced products in the space. And then just the products as a whole seem to be looking at it from a number of different ways. It's no longer just through this one lens. It's kind of multifunctional, or kind of looking at different accesses or how things interact together, and kind of trying to go through all those types of things. Again, I don't know if I overgeneralize some of that or if I missed some of it, but is that kind of how you see the space from where it was, where it is now?
100%. I think, 15 years ago, I don't even think microbiome was a term. It was really just probiotics. If, people, and this was like, the very small subset, I wouldn't even call them biohackers. I think it was just more of like this super healthy, set of people of probably a wide range of age and demographics, but probably typically, older, and a little higher socioeconomically. And they were really, taking the few probiotic SKUs that were on the market. And I would say there was probably, kind of some key trends. One is that, you started to have the initial companies that were starting to be built, within the consumer space to really build out probiotics, being not maybe behind any type of like shelf or counter, like maybe not behind the pharmacy, or sold through a pharmacist directly, or sold directly to a healthcare practitioner with a single strain, or a smaller formulation of strains. And not only that, but just being strain focused versus, what I would call polybiotic or multibiotic focused formulations, both in capsule, gummy, and then obviously moving into, functional CPG. And so kind of like fast forward to today, if you go walk through, a grocery store of any kind, whether it's in the natural channel or mass market, the term microbiome is going to be, or gut health, or probiotic, or prebiotic. And now we're starting to hear postbiotic is going to be sprinkled on so many different products, throughout kind of like the set. So it's evolved from, capsules with a probiotic focus, primarily GI health, whether it's immune, women's health, stress, mood, and then obviously functional food and beverages. And then obviously the increase in the combination of those, into different and unique formulations, pro plus pre, maybe all three of them, or just some of them are starting to have postbiotics by itself as like a standalone hero ingredient, to support a health claim. So it's evolved substantially. And so I think Spins has done a great job, both, Scott and I presented earlier this year in a kind of like a future of microbiome session. And the term that we both used was, the move to multi. And so I think that's like, if you're going to use only one word and even a suffix of something, it would be, everything is multi.
Which makes a lot of sense, because I think that, again, where what we call it, the nucleus of kind of excitement within, I'm going to use like a broad sense, like the supplement industry, but really that has in itself like kind of taken on a mind of its own. Like, what is a supplement? What isn't a supplement? Like, can you say that food and beverages are supplements, or whatever? I think ultimately the consumer is kind of switching out those things, blurring lines naturally based on how they just kind of are trying to solve certain problems. But I am always like super excited towards like some of the, what I would consider like the polar ends, or kind of the edges of the supplement industry, the ones that people maybe are like, I don't know if that's supplements, like things that are, maybe closer to like pharma type of applications, or kind of playing around with some of those things. Maybe that's not even from just the actual product ingredients. Maybe that's also just the way they're building up an ecosystem or a platform. I think about that from food and beverage. I also think about that. You mentioned like women's health, but I think even past that, maybe, beauty as well and how that's
Yeah.
playing a role and everything. It's like where those intersections or maybe where they seem to be like playing towards these like, polar ends of the spectrum. Like there's just a lot of just really interesting activity that's happening, from a, raising a bunch of capital, and that's obviously stunted by the time frame in which we are in, but like you're still
Yeah.
seeing deals getting made, you're still seeing, raises of capital in those areas. People are super excited about those spaces, and it just seems like we are just scratching the surface for like where those kind of areas are going to really emerge into. But I think a lot of this comes down to probably the understanding of just, the gut as a whole and how that has so many connections with so many different things. And then, naturally brands and the whole kind of commercial capital market kind of interconnectivity to everything, like they all naturally start to get excited because the money starts to flow around and people start to get interested to kind of tell these different stories. And again, it's no longer through that like one lens anymore. There's so many things that are happening that for me, again, I always use these terms like I'm going to be around for the next 30 years. Like these are the things that get me super excited because I look 10 years forward, I look 20 years forward, and I go, these things are going to make massive increases in the overall market, which if I'm playing in that market, I'm going to naturally benefit from too. Uh, I don't know. It's just one of those things. I don't know if you see it from that angle or not, but like I definitely have been super excited by a lot of these things lately.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to frame how the microbiome space has evolved. And I would think of it in a few distinct buckets as far as, why and how has it evolved from just being very probiotic centric, somewhat niche, very like singular channel to, obviously where it is today, touching so many different areas from within our body to, like you mentioned, skin and pet and all these other things. And I think if you kind of like put it into kind of high level buckets, I think you have, scientific advancements, you have, formulation technology advancements, and then you have social. And to some degree, I actually think the social is the strongest reason why the space has had such an evolution. I think the science has been important, and the growth of like novel strains and new prebiotics and postbiotics and, linking all of these functional ingredients to a variety of functional health conditions that are legitimately contributing to people living better, healthier lives. But fundamentally, what's happened is the conversations that once used to be taboo around gut health, bloating, bowel regularity, Belly Welly, I think, did a great job of like destigmatizing IBS with their Hot Girls of IBS campaign, by using a billboard, and it's really funny because they used a media channel that for many was, maybe not as used. Like most early stage brands initially would think, well, I'm going to try and use a digital channel, but they said, let's go old school. Let's go back to something in places that people are going to see, billboards, out of home type stuff. That's going to, like, as somebody's driving, they're going to see it. So I think the social element has been incredibly important as far as destigmatization. Number one. Number two, I think within kind of that social construct, our lifestyles have changed a lot. Our lifestyles have become busier, hectic. The stress level, I think, is something that's constantly cited across like every single consumer insights report you see as far as what is the consumer most worried about and trying to optimize in their life. And stress is one of them. And then so you have all these corollaries to how stress impacts the gut, whether it's, shifting the bacteria in your gut into a non-healthy way, whether it's not having enough time to eat properly, right? Because we're moving at a much faster pace. So we don't have time to sit down and eat 3 kind of square meals a day that are probably way more nutrient dense, right? So it's opening up this functional category. And then also I think, you know, you have a different demographic, like, whether it's Gen Z and millennials are shifting away from being very capsule VMS focused to, liking to consider, they consider that food and beverage products can be considered supplements for them. So these social forces mixed with, science and technology and formulation capability forces are really kind of coming together to massively force multiply this now burgeoning category that is the microbiome. And I think when you think about pushing out beyond the human body into, like the insides of the human body into skin, and into pets, I think something that's really interesting, because if you look at, some of the consumer insights data, um, pet owners, when they're looking for products for, their dog or their cat, are looking for strains that they know of, right? And whether that's the right strain is a whole separate scientific conversation. But this concept of familiarity, and then also of wanting to treat their pets in the same way that they would want to be treated, has obviously created, these businesses that have had exits, like Nom Nom, for example, exiting to Mars for $1 billion. They had a whole microbiome testing side of things, and even Embark, which is, was like the first, like, kind of like pet DNA testing company, is starting to experiment with, pet microbiome testing and kind of like pet microbiome products. And there's probably a myriad of reasons for that. So it's really an exciting time, and I think also it's going to be dictated by brands, and how they're going to position their product, as far as where the segments are going to, see the most growth. We're definitely seeing a ton of growth in functional beverage, with the microbiome digestive health angle. It's, one of the fastest growing categories, primarily led by, the likes of Olipop. So it's going to be exciting to watch. And I think on the topic of skin, I actually think the skin, I think the skin in the women's health vaginal microbiome areas are actually the most interesting, potentially from an innovation perspective, because both of those, like remedying both of those conditions, is solving what I would call a dysbiosis problem. So it means that you have the wrong type of bacteria that have kind of like, built up a little colony, and if you somehow figure out a way, to remove them and then remediate and replace it with the right bacteria, you're probably going to start solving some of those problems. And those are areas, again, that are super top of mind with consumers. And examples like S Biomedic was acquired. And then you have, companies like Seed, spinning out Vanguard technology into a biologics company called Luca, to really like try and target recurrent UTIs with some Vanguard, technology from the University of Maryland.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, there's so many things going on that you have to also take a look. And I'm glad, and this is probably why I enjoy talking to you. I think because you look at it from both perspectives. I think there's, societal, cultural kind of things happening. There is obviously, things that are manipulating how fast those messages get disseminated out,
Yeah.
and how fast that can kind of move. And then there's obviously the clinical advancement side of things, that like there's just a ton of really interesting stuff going on, that all of this stuff seems to kind of come together into such a weird, interesting pot that then produces so many opportunities for this space as a whole. And I think to your point, like all that multi or, whatever, it's like, that really is the special sauce. That's really where this is all going. There's so many different things going on, but you can't think about it through like the original lens of this like constraint driven aspect of the category of like, we only look at it through this perspective, which maybe transitions into something that I think you had mentioned to me. It was like a year or maybe more than ago. And it was around a technology where basically you were swallowing a capsule, and basically that capsule was going through the small intestine and through everything, and basically then you're retrieving it, and then that in itself was giving you a some set of information that then you could essentially act on. But like I think all of that goes through maybe the small intestine as a whole, and maybe that's something that gets maybe bucketed into the gut health or not or whatever. But like the segmentation out of that, like maybe there's a lot of important stuff going on that is just starting to scratch the surface, right?
Totally. And I think you raise a really good point about, what happens when a category maybe starts to get saturated a little bit. And also, what are some of the reasons why, at least with the microbiome and the GI, why have we focused only on what would be considered the lower gut or the colon? And the reason is because looking at what's going on in the small intestinal microbiome has been really challenging up until, very recently. And it's been challenging because it's really hard to get to. And so usually it's only due to an endoscopy, which means you got to, go under anesthesia and, get cut. And like the chances of that happening is very rare. And there's only been a very, very few actually microbiome studies that have tried to look at, endoscopy based sampling to look at the microbiome. But more importantly, I think, the microbiome space, due to technology innovation. And if you think again, if we take a big step back, like um, what has propelled functional CPG, functional VMS, what has propelled our entire world forward is really technology, and it's been technological advancements. And so now, there's a company called Nimble Science that has, their Simba capsule, which is basically something the size of like, a Tylenol that you swallow. And what it allows you to do is collect basically a sample in the small intestine multi-omically. And so why does that matter, and what's the value there? I think to the microbiome space is now it opens up potential new product innovation opportunities, and a myriad of other things. But I think for the sake of our conversation, a lot of product innovation opportunities for the small intestine, right? Because what's happening in the small intestine is a lot of really like digestion and absorption of, main macronutrients, particularly sugars, is there. And it's a very unique, different microbiome kind of composition than what's in our lower gut or in our colon. So being able to finally look at that is going to allow, companies to start, ones that are focusing on SIBO or potentially on IBS or on Crohn's disease, to start to get a signal as far as what probiotic strains or what prebiotics might, potentially be interacting with the microbiome there. We used to, like, all of the companies that are selling a probiotic or a symbiotic based solution have designed these capsules, and it's like one of their selling points is like, it's not going to get destroyed in the stomach. It's not going to open up in the small intestine. We know it opens up in the colon, and that's great. But maybe there's a purpose now for them to design something to open up in the small intestine. And so being able to have a simpler way to collect that data is going to, I think, open up potentially a whole new product development, opportunity, as well as maybe new type of like direct to consumer diagnostic tests and whatnot. And so it could be a pretty vanguard, opportunity from an innovation perspective. And this company in particular has done, proof of concept work with, prominent B2B ingredient companies in the space, like Lallemand, for example, and is gaining traction because, they are, particularly the B2B ingredient companies are realizing that trying to do anything new in the lower GI, it's pretty crowded, right? There's the companies that have staked their territory in probiotic strains. There's companies that have staked their territory in prebiotics and in postbiotics. And so, what can they do next? What can be a vanguard ingredient to create a whole new product category to fuel growth? So I think that's a really exciting example of, technology, simplicity, and also just having something that has been validated to be equal to the gold standard, which is an endoscopy. So the quality of what you're getting is going to be super high. And then I think the final thing is, everyone is looking to try and find these new magic strains, right, that have this functional value. And, this capsule in particular allows you to almost like, gather, some strains and keep it in a protective anaerobic shell, meaning oxygen won't get in. And so it preserves these very sensitive bacteria that are able to live in the small intestine and parts of our GI tract because the oxygen levels are low. And once if you open it up and expose it, they're kind of just going to disappear because they're super sensitive. So being able to also like potentially discover new strains is really interesting. And actually within the B2B microbiome ingredient kind of like space, anaerobic strains is like one of the hot trending innovation kind of avenues, because some of these strains are the ones that have been shown in a lot of like human clinical research to be efficacious for a variety of conditions.
Yeah, I think about that in a disruptive sense because you mentioned lower gut, and definitely a lot of these companies that own the most prominent, I guess, probiotic strains. I mean, they are massive companies by any measure. So to your point, it's very hard, I think, a lot of times to break through with anything, even if you have the most unique, interesting
Yeah.
stuff out there, like, business plague filled, or I guess tactics and war strategy and all that. How, naturally people are either going to try to take you out or figure out a way to, like, minimize what you're doing. And it's like kind of it's a gnarly kind of consideration a lot of times, especially for startups, to kind of go against these larger companies. But then when you kind of refocus or reframe this into something else, then all of a sudden there's a blue ocean, or this green field that you're like, okay, let's try something new. Maybe that we become, complementary to some of the things they're doing, or maybe there's something that works together. Or we're not necessarily thought of as, totally a foe, where we're kind of some frenemy or something like that in some of these companies, which maybe gets into transitioning into, like, another kind of area that's super disruptive, I think, right now. And you mentioned about maybe some second order effects, or things that are going on, is like, GLP-1 as a whole, and how that interacts with just the microbiome space as a whole. I mean, I'll take it and totally broaden it into just a lot of categories, and how, you definitely need to figure out, where are you positioned within this new, framework of, we'll just call it weight management or weight wellness, or whatever that is. But, like, you have to figure out, like, are you going to be a friend or a foe? One, kind of where are you going to play on this whole spectrum? And then secondly, do you have the ability to kind of work within some off-ramp applications, where then, like, as people are making lifestyle changes and people are starting to come off those drugs, do you then have the opportunity to be, another solution that kind of keeps them on that straight and narrow, or something like that, in a different set? Because I don't think anybody wants to be on those drugs for a long period of time. Obviously, if it's a type 2 diabetes situation, or like an extreme obesity situation, like, you have to be on that thing a lot longer than the typical person. But I don't think anybody, wants to be on these things forever. So then it gives you these opportunities to figure out, like, where do you position yourselves? And again, I'm talking about this from, protein companies. These could be, people offering greens, people offering whatever it is. Like, I think all of a sudden people are going to fundamentally change in some big way. And again, we're only scratching the surface probably about where we are at GLP-1. If this is even 10 years down the line and it grows into, maybe 10% of the population, you still have to think there's probably still another 30 or 40% of the population in America that could take this thing. That's not even anywhere even near that point. So then you think all these shifts, and what can you do? Like, it is super interesting that, like, these massive CPG brands, massive retailers, everybody's looking at and trying to figure out, can we model this out? Can we figure out what this actually means? And what are the impacts? Because all of a sudden you're going to see these second order effects start to play in there. And if you're not positioned appropriately, you're going to be in trouble. And I know that's because we're thinking about the future. Like, I don't have to state that, like, yes, today, maybe there's not as much impacts that are going to be, hugely affecting your business. But again, if you want to be appropriately positioned long-term, you have to consider how disruptive this particular set of, just drugs, or even like further biologics, like that whole situation, like this can all evolve in such a way that, like, we're only scratching the surface.
I completely agree. And, one of the things that I think is so important is to keep your aperture wide, and to kind of, like, understand some of these, asymmetric, competitive forces. And it's something that I've always, like, kept an eye on. And I think, as it relates to GLP-1, specifically, well, I guess take a step back, as it relates to the microbiome field overall. One thing I've noticed is that, when a field gets very popular, and you start to see growth, sometimes you stay very focused, and you think that this party is never going to end, and that there's nothing that can be as superior. And the microbiome was a space where, there was just scientific study after scientific study saying it's linked to this, 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 and this, and this, and there's all these associations. And some has moved beyond associations to, efficacy, like the stuff that series in rebiotics through Ferring have done with C. diff. But as it relates to metabolic health and weight loss, these two categories, as I know you're, intimately knowledgeable, have been probably for the last 3 to 5 years, like within kind of innovation conversations, like these are like the hot areas that everyone was like kind of counting on. And unfortunately, in my experience, the VMS and functional health space doesn't really, I think, sometimes see what's going on within digital health and pharma. And so GLP-1 came, for some people, they're like, wow, it just came out of nowhere. And now it's like, it's being massively disruptive. But this drug had been, this biologic, has been around for a while. But it's kind of found its path in weight loss and in metabolic health. And so all of a sudden, these plans that, all these companies have had, whether it's in the microbiome space or the protein space or the functional, CPG, VMS space, they're scrambling, right? Because at least in the short term, the efficacy of GLP-1s sometimes can be better than, a supplement or a functional CPG product. And so I think you raise a great point to say, well, now where do we fit? And what are these second order effects? And I think there's some pretty clear second order effects. And I know you touched upon it in some of your other content, but I think one is, people on GLP-1s. Well, first of all, there's a massive difference in duration, staying on GLP-1s, belief of self-belief of efficacy between people that are taking GLP-1s for weight loss and for type 2 diabetes. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think what's important to think about is that, one of the biggest second order effects is that it's changing their body's, chemistry to say, I don't want certain types of foods anymore. I don't want other certain products. And so the second or third order effect is them starting to holistically reevaluate what do they want to do as far as their wellness regimen. And so I think it's going to take some deep consumer insights work on the part of brands to say, okay, maybe we're not going to be able to go head to head against a GLP-1, but at some point, to your point, people aren't going to stay on this forever, and they're not going to stay on it forever for either side effects or for a cost factor, right? I mean, there's state Medicaid, organizations that are completely stopping, any new GLP-1s because it's literally bankrupting them, right? Because it's so expensive. So I think in the microbiome space in particular, I think first of all, there's the conversation around the microbiome and certain microbiome-based ingredients producing GLP-1s within the gut. So there's that. And then, there's certain brands that are marketing themselves as, nature's Ozempic or like a natural form to that. And there's probably regulatory things that, depending on how risky you want to get, it's, you can go down that route, and it doesn't mean that it's wrong. But I do think from a microbiome perspective and probably from a functional product perspective, that there's definitely what I would consider an adjunctive approach to take, and to start thinking about how does this product force multiply the beneficial effects of GLP-1s, or for the subset of, there still is a large subset of consumers that they're not drug people, and they never will be, but they want to look after their metabolic health, and they want to like support a healthy weight, or they want to lose weight. And so I think really starting to do a lot of very detailed targeting is important, but I see adjunctive applications as being super high. And then I also see as marketing as like, how can you maintain all the positive progress you made once you transition off of a GLP-1? And finally, potentially there could be something adjunctively around, our product not only helps you keep that weight off from the GLP-1, but it's going to also reduce the side effects of GI distress or anything else that's going on in the body. So it's still the early innings, but the one thing I know about pharma is once they see a cash machine, I mean, we saw this with the opioid crisis, right? Purdue Pharma saw the amount of cash that they were able to make, and they did everything to further optimize its response. And unfortunately, in the case of opioids, they didn't, do what was needed to reduce addiction. But pharma is really good once they see a cash machine of optimization and of expansion and of trying to reduce any side effects sometimes. And so I think that's the big question mark. And fortunately, because Lilly with Mounjaro is going direct to consumer and they're publicly traded, we're going to start to get a sense within the next few quarters of really, is there a D2C? And you're going to start to see it, with other digital health companies that are launching, whether it's GLP-1s or other type of drugs, whether it's Roe or whether it's Hims or whether it's, WW, whether it's Found, there's a bunch of digital health companies. And so it's going to be an interesting time, but I think the key takeaway for the microbiome space is to always keep like one eye, looking kind of like wide, keep your periphery open, because you never know when that next disruption is going to come. And the final thing I'll say around GLP-1s is there was a huge study that Dr. Eric Topol shared, I think on his Twitter or LinkedIn, saying that we're also finding that GLP-1s are highly efficacious around colorectal cancer and other, conditions in which microbiome-based solutions, whether it's from a functional VMS, CPG, or even a drug target perspective, are looking to solve, that GLP-1s also solve. So it's going to be, that's like a disruptive class of biologics that it should be watched moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, tons of great information there that like got my head spinning. I think one that's off the top of my head of just sticking around is like, with Mounjaro and just kind of that moving into a different channel of distribution, or I guess, looking at it from a different perspective, and maybe how that's as a whole, again, another, I think, blurring or like this converging of like so many different things of, distribution channels on how we think about health as a whole. I, a number of years ago was, driving deep into the idea that, pharmacies or the drug channel would have to turn into wellness channels. But it seems like they didn't do a quick enough job at it because grocers decided to like jump over them and kind of take that role within the consumer's mind. They've spent a lot of energy towards positioning themselves in this kind of like retail health perspective, if that is, championing or starting to like, slowly roll out some different layers or partnerships that can help with understanding, the food as medicine type of an approach. Also just, how, arguably this is really important now, but it's always important. I don't think that we're outside of the bounds of what typically is with people on SNAP programs, or, how many people are continuously investing in, if they have access to like HSAs or FSA accounts, and like how they're kind of trying to, play this role. And really, I think in my mind, I always kind of roll this up into this like thinking that, and this has probably been happening for a while, but like individuals as a whole, maybe this is a prior generation, they thought of themselves just as patients. That's it. Like whatever the doctor says in that particular situation is correct, and there's really no, active participation. And then all of a sudden, we viewed ourselves as consumers in this like, healthcare market. Like we have some say, or we have some other kind of ways that we're approaching problems, or at least trying to attack it from different ways, or at least the options are there, which I think is highly disruptive to so many different areas. And I know we're talking about this from, the microbiome space. We're talking about this, specifically, I opened this up about, retail as a whole, but like, it's just interesting how other institutions are starting to play a different role within this. Maybe other previous institutions are getting like knocked down in how maybe people view them or trust them. And now all of a sudden other ones have kind of taken on a role to reposition how a consumer can kind of play within it. I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there.
There certainly is. And it's all been unfolding probably within the last, I would say 4-ish years, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I think to your point, Josh, over the last probably 10 to 15 years, there's been this shift for a ton of reasons, from, reactive to proactive to, kind of, being more preventative focused, optimizing our lifespan, especially now that not only is like there's reports that our lifespan and the quality of our lifespan has decreased, right? That, once we hit a certain age, like 65, 70, we're staying alive longer, but those years are actually not really that fun. You're impacted by polychronic diseases. But as it relates to kind of like this, why are we seeing a rise in, at least within kind of like retail and within kind of what we're being socialized, both retail health, FSA, HSA, SNAP. And a lot of it comes down to, I think what you've been reporting on a lot, which is kind of like the D2C channel. Like, so channels are starting to shift as far as effectiveness and as far as like margins and as far as, scale and as far as saturation. And when you think about, again, big picture numbers, right? $4.5 trillion every year and is growing is spent on healthcare in America. And, these businesses like grocery stores, they typically made money in two ways. They made it through selling, like grocery items, and then a lot of them attached a pharmacy to it. And both of those businesses are starting to kind of like decrease as far as, their revenue contribution, or the margins are just not there. And so they're like, how can we capture some of this $4.5 trillion? Because we want to grow. And also you're starting to see within health insurance, this opening up of things. Like, so one, I think, really tangible example, to the audiences and the companies that we work with and the people that will be listening is, very recently, a lot of health insurance plans have started to reimburse their members for registered dietitian visits and for like nutrition counseling. And it varies on the amount of like sessions you get, from like maybe 3 to up to 12 per year. Right. So a grocery store like a Kroger, that has, I think, the largest network of in-store nutritionists, is like, wow, okay, what if I can leverage reimbursement and get paid to have our in-store nutritionists like do nutrition coaching? And hey, by the way, we have a gigantic store filled with tens of thousands of products to help you like optimize your diet, right? So there's that. And then with FSA, HSA, I think a lot of digitally native brands are starting to, see the pinch of customer acquisition costs and all of that. And there's, just with FSA alone, there's like $3+ billion. And now there's technology is the disruptor here. You have companies like TrueMed, you have companies like Sika Health that are figuring out ways to use some of the edge cases, to make products that aren't like 100% down the fairway eligible for these programs. They figured out ways to use technology layers to make it eligible. And it's starting to open up those revenue bundles. So it's a novel revenue source. And imagine, like, for you or I that have an FSA or an HSA, imagine like our favorite product no longer coming directly out of our bank account, but coming out of like a separate pool of money that we're like, well, gosh, am I going to spend this whole thing this year? Because like 30% of FSA dollars aren't spent every year, and it's a use it or lose it thing. So you have some time periodicities that are being pushed. But I think fundamentally, brands within the functional health spaces, I think, would find a lot of value in understanding some of these forces that are happening, because it could present, different monetization opportunities. It could become a channel that they never even thought existed. And it could potentially be a way to make sure, again, that they don't get left behind. Because the one thing that's also happening, particularly in kind of this retail health environment, is the rise of algorithms. And algorithms to basically say what's healthy and what's not healthy. Because if you're in the healthy bucket, then you're eligible for all these other things, these pools of cash that can be used in a grocery store or like on Instacart or, wherever. So it's really important to understand how your brand fits into these places and how your brand is considered within these algorithms that stores are starting to use. Like, Kroger has their opt-up score, which they use. And it's like their prominent thing that they display with products from 0 to 100. The higher you are, the better. Walmart has started to explore a partnership with a company called Sifter, to kind of rank foods and products, related to different health conditions, so that they can then start siloing that to say, hey, if you're searching for diabetic friendly things, we're just going to use an algorithm and AI to like make the choices a lot simpler. So definitely, I think forces that are shifting is is something that a lot of brands aren't aware of and should be.
Yeah, I think as a category, or I guess a subject matter as a whole,
Yeah.
with algorithms, I think that people, it's gotten to a point where I think they are so efficiently running in the background of things that you don't even realize they're there, and you think you're making your own decisions.
Yeah.
Yet, there's something that's subconsciously manipulating, situations, and sometimes that's great. I'm definitely not a technology hater or future. Like I consider myself a futurist. I always think of things in the most positive context, even though I always also have to balance that with, what's the negative side of this, or what's the way in which somebody
Yeah.
is going to control this in a way that we don't like. But I generally just put that to the side and go, hopefully that doesn't happen, unless I'm, I guess engaged with somebody that I have to make sure that we account for that stuff. But, I think algorithms as a whole, and I guess broader than that, like what feeds the algorithms of data is, the new gold, the new oil, the new whatever, that, kind of high end commodity that people want to have access to. And that feeds them into, you said, if it's algorithms this way, or if it's algorithms, in a more personalized approach, because it's, bringing in so many different data sources and kind of giving you this N1 or close to N1 situation where you can start to, attack your problems in a more unique way. Like we're nowhere near, I guess, where that all goes, but I do think that's super interesting to understand, like what eventually we get to. The one thing I know in the near term that I continue to struggle with is that, it always seems like we get to this like cyborgy kind of like we're this Terminator combo person situation, where then it takes all the fun away from a lot of these kind of societal or cultural things that we have with like food and beverage, and just like, meeting together in community and whatever. So in the short term, I struggle to like understand like how that fully gets up to a point in which it breaks through. But like long term, again, like when we think generations forward and everybody's stuck in digital communities and everybody's kind of thinking about these words reframed or differently, like maybe those things are less important, or less, in a way that would affect change. I don't know. It's a wild thing to let your brain just like go down in that path and think about, if this, then that, or that, wherever.
No, it definitely is. And I think there's a few interesting learning lessons there. One for brands to remember your brand story and your brand development and your resonance with consumers matters a lot, because if you have an incredibly strong brand, people are going to seek your product out, whether there's going to be an algorithm or not, right? In all these like ways we can shop digitally, whether it's going to walmart.com, to the Kroger, website, to Instacart or whatever, like we can always search for a product directly if we know exactly what we're looking for. And so that's the power of brand. But I think from a discovery perspective, it is important to understand, I think, how these algorithms are made and how they're being used at different retailers. Because to your point, it's going to, when we're uneducated about a brand or a product category, it's going to be served up to us. And also, I think what's important as well, and it's something that I've seen, in my work, particularly, with Olipop, as far as helping them kind of in this, what we're calling it a beverages medicine space, is once I started digging into how some of these algorithms are constructed, I realized that they have a lot of good intent, but for products that are disrupting a category, like an unhealthy category, and again, just to use Olipop as an example, disrupting like people, consuming soda, right? 2 grams of 5 grams of sugar, 9 grams of fiber versus like 40 to 50 plus grams of sugar in a can of soda and no functional benefits. These algorithms don't understand, but see, the thing with Olipop is there's still a little bit of sugar.
Yeah.
And so for some of these algorithms, because there's a little bit of sugar, it doesn't get, it's not considered, within certain product categories as being diabetic friendly, or, maybe sometimes even being considered healthy because there's still a little bit of sugar. And so you're like, well, that's totally nuts, because we know that it's getting people to stop drinking soda, which is the ultimate goal of what we want. So I think, some of these algorithms, their intent is to mean well, but they have to be careful to not be too rigid, to filter out products that actually are doing good in this world, and but would be, by the rigidity of an algorithm, kind of excluded, and it would be excluded from someone that could potentially, benefit from consuming that product, whether that's, directly or like indirectly. And while still, to your point, a lot of these better for you products are kind of like built on the same nostalgic structure of the things that the unhealthy product, got us to love. And, for people like us, that grew up with an age of so many unhealthy products that now are being better for you, right? Like, we have all this nostalgia in our brain of like, what was it like sharing our, Coke around, or like our favorite soda, with our friends or our family in special moments, or, sharing like another iconic, but maybe not super healthy product that's being disrupted, whether it's, better for you gummies with fiber, like gummy bears, or candies with fiber, or, a snack type of thing, if you have IBS, when you couldn't have it when you were a kid, so I think that's also important to think about, for these people making algorithms, that there's an emotional and nostalgic component associated with some of these better for you products that also have, some positive effect on community and socialization.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think especially some of the early algorithms and things, like they miss on the general like context of
Yeah.
what's around them, because ultimately they're
Hey,
the
Josh.
rules. It's like you feed them the rules, and that's what where we need kind of that evolution towards AI and machine learning, and kind of having the ability to kind of adjust over time to what the overall environment is. And again, those things are obviously running again in the background of a lot of decisions, and they will continue to. But when a consumer, I think, is either in autopilot mode, or they, have an active role within deciding, what they want to do and what they want to eat and drink and take, and just kind of any decision within their, kind of matrix. Like, I think a lot of people will look for social proof, and I think that has wildly different definitions, or maybe people's way in which they value different ones over other ones. I think when we talk about supplements or VMS or functional, like, a lot of times we default to the thought of this expert, this person. And experts, I think a lot of times we think about that have a bunch of letters after their name, or some type of authority on what they're talking about, which is still extremely important. I still find that, especially in a lot of brands that are close to that and need that, like, that is extremely important. I think there are platforms and things that maybe help you gain some of that expertise, or people kind of giving that thumbs up to say like, oh, this is a great product, we love this one. But on the flip side, I think if we probably took the whole population, most people are getting their social proof from like what their social media, and that's
Yep.
probably TikTok, because they do a extremely good job at feeding you with things that kind of just confirm what you already are thinking. Like, they're just like, they make you to the point where you believe that this is the most impressive thing you've ever seen in your life, and it makes you act on that, which is super impressive from their perspective, but also super scary from what we're talking about, because you could quickly get information that maybe is not the most, appropriate or great to act on for somebody to do, instead of having maybe some better sets of thumbs up that will give you products that maybe are better suited for what you're looking for.
No, definitely. And I think that's again where you have to have your own autonomy, and hopefully it won't become a world where everything is ruled by an algorithm, and that we won't have this kind of like very organic product discovery like we used to, as far as just walking around a grocery store and enjoying that process like I do, and discovering new products. Or but it's definitely, I think, a component that is here to stay, and will only further be used. And I think the flip side, I think there's a lot of like opinions you can take, but you know, Professor Scott Galloway, I think, really astutely said it, something to the effect like, we don't want more choice, we just want to be more confident in the choices we make. And I think so many consumers are sometimes overwhelmed by the sheer amount of choices, and that's potentially where an algorithm could really help them out. But the hope is that the algorithm, again, won't be so rigid that it'll exclude something that could be actually very beneficial because one little like minute detail doesn't really apply.
Well, this was I'm trying to think of like a really good word to use to like really express, I think, how much I enjoyed this episode. But maybe, such is life. Sometimes you can't find the words for
Yeah.
how great it was. But like, I'm excited to be able to share this with my audience. I think they're going to love this. So I just overall appreciate the time and all the insights and information, knowledge that you shared with us, Noah.
Really appreciate you having me and kind of letting me jump on my soapbox and connect with your community and really, I think, do something that isn't done enough, which is have a little bit wider ranging discussion. So thank you again. Always enjoy it, and looking forward to next time.
I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. If you did, consider hitting that like button to support me. Also, help me get to my new short-term goal of 4,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. I'd love to see you join me on this journey, but we need to fix the fact that more than 90% of you that are watching this YouTube video right now are not subscribed to my channel, and that makes me extremely sad. But I do want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.